Finally, ShakeDown is back for 2014. I'm going to leave the F1 car launches for another show, because believe it or not, I don't do dick jokes. But on Facebook and Twitter, I've announced a call to action for someone to get a video of a team guy polishing the nose of one of these cars. I'd publish that video. You know what, better yet, I'd give it to Mike Musto. Let him run it on Big Muscle. Get it? Ugh. Today it's the 2014 Rolex 24 at Daytona and the launch of the Tudor United SportsCar Championship. Now remember, NASCAR bought the American Le Mans Series. They merged it with their Grand Am property, and it all kicked off at the home field, Daytona Speedway, for the Rolex 24. And then now we're going to head down to the old ALMS home field, Sebring, which is now owned, leased by NASCAR. Today via Skype, we'll get a debrief of how it all went down at Daytona from Scott Atherton, President and COO of IMSA, and a few drivers, ex-Grand Am guys, Jordan and Ricky Taylor, and ex-ALMS Corvette racer Tommy Milner, to get their feedback on how it was different racing this year from last year. Now, I may have my hands full with these guys, but it'll be okay. It's not a witch hunt. It's not an infomercial. Just reporting the facts from the guys in the game so you can decide. Holy shit, I just sound like Fox TV, who are the programming partners for IMSA. So insert your fair and balanced joke about me right about here. Some 18 months or so ago, the plans for the Tudor United SportsCar Championship were announced. For the past 9 months, IMSA, the reformed sanctioning body, has been working on technical rules to put the race cars from 2 separate series and 2 separate philosophies on track in balanced performance. At Daytona for the Rolex 24, IMSA put their plan to work. The teams and racers put their work on track. The race ran, the media did its thing, winners got to the checkered flag. The race had the expected Daytona prototype overall winner. The best P2 car was P5. The PC class learned how tough 24 hours of racing can be. In GTLM, it gave Porsche, with their new car, a victory. Corvette and Viper got development car experience, and BMW showed style points for using strategy versus speed to get to a GTLM P2 finish, and gave themselves fodder to bang on the balance of performance formula that they think is fighting against them. The GTD class was the show everyone expected before and during the race-ending driving penalty controversy, which we will discuss. Now, there was an ugly crash, and prayers to Mimo Gidley and Matteo Malucelli for their guts and their best possible recoveries. We all pray for that. And all of it fired up the fans on both sides of the merger, those who want this to work and those just waiting for their worst sports car nightmares. All of it added up to entitlement, of opinion, of course, which everyone has, and maybe jumping to conclusions, also a perceived entitlement these days. And I had a hell of a good time entertaining myself on Twitter with comments during the race, the TV broadcast, and that MRN radio coverage because, hey, it's not like I don't like to do both, spew my opinion and overreact, you know. Just to keep the heart rate up and my metabolism cranking. Now, I could go off on one of my rants that some of you seem to cherish about the Tudor United SportsCar Championship and the Daytona 24. And reading all of those media out there, seems that a few of the professionals, hey, they already did that, so why do more here now? Instead, let's go to the Skype and get with our guests, and it'll all come out there. Tommy Milner, thanks for joining us in our little debrief here out of Rolex. We're between races, and you have the experience of being an ALMS guy coming into the new Tudor series, but you did some Grand Am time as well in BMWs with the dad thing, and even a Panos, if I recall, right?
Yeah, Panos was ALMS, but I did a couple.
Okay.
That's right. One year when Grand Am in 2005, and then I've done some Rolex 24s throughout the year since then.
And we're going to turn this into a little bit of Meet Tommy Milner. So you're the internet phenom with Corvette Racing, but it's not just that. You've won, tell me if I get it right, you've won at Le Mans, you've won at Sebring, you've won at Long Beach, and pretty much except for a little Formula BMW, you've always been a sports car guy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I started off there in Formula BMW in 2004. I was one of their junior drivers, along with guys like Graham Rahal and James Hinchcliffe. And did that for a year and was probably not the right size for those kind of cars. I was definitely the biggest guy in the field at that point. And so that went okay. I had one pole at Cleveland. But at the end of the year, my dad put me in one of his sports cars in an M3. And my first race at VIR, put it on pole. And last race of the year, I won in Fontana. So that was sort of my ticket the next year there with my dad's team.
And just to finish the job, you matriculated from there to the factory BMW ride and then found yourself with Corvette Racing. And now in the C7R. So let's start a little bit there. Obviously, the new car is kind of mega cool. And I've heard all the pitch about some refinements and a 40% stiffer chassis. How does it translate? What's the difference driving the 7 versus the 6 that you can already feel?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, my first experience with the C7R was at Sebring. And immediately, you'd notice the car is definitely better over the bumps, no question about it. And the more I sort of talked to the engineers about that, the more they told me about the setup on the car at that point, and they had basically said that we were stiffer on springs than we had ever been at Sebring with the 7. And to be honest, it felt softer. So basically, what that tells me is, that in years past, we were feeling lots of the bumps and everything through the suspension. Through the chassis was absorbing some of those bumps, and now we're just simply getting, obviously there's some chassis flex involved there, but you could feel that difference immediately right away. And little things like putting power down now, the way the car puts power down, the way it drives off the corner is a bit more friendly. And just in general, the car is the window that you have sort of just being almost out of control and just in control. That window is just that little bit bigger now with the 7, which is just translates to and make it easier for us as drivers to really extract the most out of the car.
So not to put words in your mouth, but help me. If the platform's stiffer, the translation is more precise, and your ability to nail a setup is equally as accurate.
Exactly, that's exactly right. Just when you nailed it. As you limit the places, some flex, some unknown flex, throughout the chassis itself, the car itself, it makes that any setup change that you make is more precise, is more what the engineers expect from the car. So stiffer is definitely better.
So I don't want Gary Pratt chasing me around the paddock trading secrets, but help me on a couple of things. Are there changes to the suspension geometry from 7 back to 6?
That's not a question for me to answer for sure. I don't know enough about the car. It's very similar. I know with the way the rules are set, that for the ACO rule set, basically, which we run under in GTLM and the new Tudor series, that the suspension pickup points on the chassis must be within a certain sphere of what they are on the street car. So I would say that there's definitely changes, but they're probably small compared to what you expect.
So now I need to go check the 7, see if those pickups change from the production 6. 2 last car questions. Watching your video, the driver's eye thing that's probably going to break here, on the downshifts, there's some staccato noise thing going on there. Is there something different going on in the downshift that's either engine management, or you're just hyper quick there with the paddles?
Obviously, with each year and each race, usually we have some small adjustments that the engine guys do and the gearbox guys do as far as the logic, or so to speak, as far as what they do for downshifts. So with 7, we definitely have some, hopefully better strategies to make the downshifts a bit quicker and a bit crisper. Sometimes what you hear is and at nighttime you can see this, there's some backfire that kind of comes out of the exhaust pipes to the side of the car, and usually some of the extra pops is just some nice flames for the fans to see.
Tell me you're not blowing the diffusers on this damn thing there. That's
no.
The last car question is, what is this car? And I know I'm gonna preface it by saying I know you test privately, and maybe Daytona was the only time you were really head-to-head, but what are you finding this car is doing different and better than the competition, your Vipers and your BMW and Porsche?
It's tough to say a little bit. It seems like that in general, our Corvette the last couple of years, ever since I've driven with the team, starting in 2011, the Corvette's been really good on brakes, and that still holds true with 7. It's hard. I really have never driven this car at Daytona. I've always driven GT cars on tires that are fine but don't have the grip level that the Michelins do for sure. So when I went there for the test day, I was definitely having to kind of readjust myself to the speeds that I could do through the bus stop and places like that. So I don't have the best comparison as far as 6 to 7, and at Daytona. I think we'll get a better read on that at Sebring again. But I mean, the car, just in general, the car is as good as C6 was in every regard. And then there's little places here and there where 7 is already better than 6 was. So for the first race, for the first sort of, first go around of the C7, the guys at Pratt & Miller and Corvette Racing have done a pretty awesome job to get that thing up to speed already.
So Daytona is unique, and that may kind of taint the A-B comparison I'm about to ask. But in the Tudor race versus your ALMS experience, was there any difference that you noticed or felt, either working traffic or passing or being overtaken by these different cars?
Yeah, it was definitely that was probably the biggest difference from what I was used to is and obviously it's first race, so some of the speeds, the top speeds of the GTD cars were quite a bit quicker, some of them at least, than our cars.
Ferrari.
Yeah, and Audi and many others, to be honest. So that makes our life definitely a lot harder because we have to work that much harder in the brake zones and the corners to try to get by these guys. And really, that's not good for the racing, because in the end, and I'm surprised we didn't see much of this, but there was the potential for lots of contact between us and prototype cars and those GTD cars, because the fact that they are so fast in a straight line. If we can get underneath them in a brake zone and sort of pull enough of a gap in the corner, then we can usually kind of hold them off. Or most of the guys were generally pretty nice and would even so they could draft up behind us and get past us. They would lift a bit early and let us keep going. So that was tough. I don't think we'll see that problem anywhere else. It's just Daytona. It's such a unique track that we go to throughout the year. Yeah. It's most like Le Mans in the sense that top speed really makes a big difference there.
What surprised me a little bit is watching the Corvettes, working with the PCs. I know there was maybe a 2-second lap difference, but it seemed like you were drawing them in down the straightaways and down into the banking and out.
Yeah, to be honest, if I'm complaining about the speed differential, I'm sure those guys are really mad, because they were definitely slower than us in a straight line. And basically every time that a PC car got behind me out of the bus stop, he could draft up past me and next to me and about NASCAR 3 and 4, and then the straight line speed would take over, and we could out drag them into turn 1. And our car is good on the brakes, so they couldn't usually get by us in 1. So there were times when, if I wasn't at the end of the race there, especially, I wasn't really racing for much anymore after our gearbox problem. But, so there was times when we can definitely be nice to those guys and let them get by us. But when you're in the heat of the battle, you don't want to give up any time at all. So you're definitely making them frustrated. And then that leads to, more issues later on down the road and, brake zones and them getting anxious to get by. So that differential in speed really would be nicer if we could get that sort of sorted out. But I don't think we'll see it being as much of a problem anywhere else this year, just because, again, Daytona is so different.
Got it. And very briefly, you kind of touched on the question I was going to ask you. You finished P5 at Daytona. Is it typical new car stuff that you're still sorting through? Or is there a test leading up to Sebring that's going to get this car ready to get back to the podium?
It's definitely unfortunate. We all through testing and through race week, we never really saw any major mechanical issues. Something and those issues that the 3 car had and our car had in the race. The 3 car had a overheating issue that our car had earlier on in the race, but was able to sort of fix itself. And unfortunately, the 3 car just didn't have that luck in their favor. So that was sort of new to us. So there's something to look at for sure going into Sebring. Definitely, new car stuff. There's new systems, new plumbing, things like that. So those guys will go back and look at all the data and see if they can figure out what went wrong there. In our case, our gearbox issue right at the end there, I think it's just a part failure that caused us the overheating issue. So again, they'll look at that and see if they can figure out what went wrong there.
When you look at the Tudor season coming up and the championship in mind, What's your biggest thought, either the plus or worry to fight for this championship?
Well, I mean, the thing for us now is the points are so different than what we've been used to.
Okay.
And it seems like now that there's not a huge advantage to winning races as there used to be in the ALMS. And you've seen that in years past in Grand Am. You have the points races goes down to the wire. A lot of that's just because if you can just finish races, just get points, that ends up being, the most important thing, as opposed to, any kind of DNF, any race where you don't get many points. That's a big problem. So, it was great for us to be able to finish. They changed the gearbox in about 25 or 30 minutes, got us back out there and salvaged a spot or two there. So every last little point, I think, is going to make a pretty big difference this year. And just got to keep that in mind that even so, I mean, we all want to win races, obviously, but got to get points.
Well, I'm going to fix it for you because I'm short like Bernie Ecclestone, so I'm already lobbying for double points in the last 3 races. Okay?
Great.
Yeah,
great.
Good move, huh? Tell me tell me a story, if you don't mind, a quick story about you that made you the racer you are. What defines you, Tom?
What defines me? It's funny. I mean, I think a lot of the people around the racing community that know my dad, I'm quite a bit different than he is. He's very outspoken, German, and loud, and I'm generally a pretty, reserved guy. And everyone that knows my mom says that I get everything from my mom. So maybe because my dad never drove a race in his life in a race car, and maybe I got all my driving skill from my mom, and she is a pretty good driver herself. So, what makes me me? I mean, I think in my case, I grew up around racing, obviously with my dad's team, and I was fortunate to be around some really great race car drivers, guys, Hans Stuck, Bill Oberlin, Boris Said. There's lots of guys that still race today that all at one point drove for my dad. Bobby Rahal drove for my dad at some point a couple times. Ari Leindyke. But the guys that stand out the most to me is, guys like Hans and Boris and Bill and those guys that I was able to watch growing up and just sort of see how they approach a race weekend, how they talk to the engineers, and can learn the good things from them and learn the bad things as well and what not to do. As my dad would quickly tell me the things that they did wrong. So I think from that regard, it's have a unique perspective, because growing up as a kid, I didn't really want to be a race car driver. I wanted to play sports. And then when I got in a go-kart for the first time when I was 14 or 15, and that all changed quickly. I'm having fun right now, and I wouldn't change it for the world for sure.
So not to expose flaws or pick on you, but when you think of racing, when you're alone, when you think of driving and racing, what part do you focus on to say, I want to do that better, or this is my strength, I'm going to hone in on that?
In my case, I mean, I think after every race weekend, I always try to find one area where I didn't do very well and try to improve on that. And I know for sure over the years, and I've gotten a bit better at this, and I don't know if it's the case for other drivers or what, but for me, finding the limit in the brake zones has always been sort of the last step that I find throughout a race weekend. So I'm always conscious of that and try to make sure that I am maximizing brake zones every lap.
And watch me attempt to pull this full circle and to help the kids that watch and like to learn how to drive. That may be an extension of having a good tire that gives you a good read, a good brake pedal, and a chassis that's predictable. Yeah,
sure. I mean, I think part of it comes down to, in my case, it's easy for me to find the limit in corners. But for how I am, I've just learned, and this is mostly goes back to looking at data and comparing myself to guys like Boris and Bill and Hans, is when I was younger, the most time that I lost was in brake zones. So I recognized early on that was my weakest link, and I've always just ever since then tried to make sure that is less and less of a problem, at each race that I go to.
So I have a history of breaking my rule of last question, but now I got to go with it. So when you're looking for that mega lap, are you backing off the pedal a little bit, or are you braking harder? Where are you finding the time for that mega lap when you need it?
In my case, it's brake zones, and it's braking just that little bit later and coming off the brake pedal just that little bit earlier and trying to roll just that little bit extra speed. That for me, especially like on a qualifying lap, that's one area that I know in my mind that I need to really, focus on and concentrate on.
Cool. Tommy, thanks. We will see you at Sebring. Get
yourself to the
podium. Thanks again.
Sounds good.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Leo. See you guys.
Scott Atherton is the president and COO of the new Tudor United SportsCar Championship and IMSA. The disclaimer is we've known each other from other work in earlier days, ALMS and such. I appreciate your time. What I wanted to do after our Rolex 24, like any racing enterprise, is do a little bit of a debrief. And rather than have the audience listen to me opinionate, get some comments firsthand.
Sure, happy to.
Do a scorecard, if you will. So I want to start with the racing, but frankly, I want to show a little bit of appropriateness and protocol. Before we get into the racing, I want to talk about safety. And obviously we saw Mimo Gidley and Matteo Malucelli have a serious accident, and our prayers and all that go out to them. Yes. But my question for IMSA is, what protocols take place after something like that occurs?
There is a very formal protocol that occurs. First and foremost, the focus is on the drivers and their well-being and making sure that the absolute best care is provided to them and to their families. Crew members, everybody's affected by something like that. And, and until we are confident that all of those elements are in place and under control, if you will, really nothing else matters. Once that's achieved, then we quickly shift gears to then focus on learning from all of these incidents. And in this case, both cars were immediately removed from the track and secured so that there was no opportunity for anyone to take inappropriate photos or potentially alter any part of the car. And they were removed up to the Research and Development Center up in Concord, North Carolina, a part of the NASCAR organization. And it's not for the purposes of recreating the accident, but it's more to study how these cars performed, so to speak, as a result of this accident. And are there changes that can be made to make these cars safer? I think we saw one of the most jarring, horrific crashes we've seen in a long time. And while injuries were sustained in both examples, the fact of the matter is both drivers are expected to have a full recovery, and you could argue that the cars did what they were intended to do. They kept those drivers alive.
Did the safety teams work the way you imagined? Because we've moved from an IMSA traveling team to teams, I guess, that are with every venue track.
Yeah, I understand the question, and I think there's probably more qualified people than me to answer that. I haven't seen any follow-up reports. I've been told that the extrication process and the medical attention was very well organized, very timely. The response was quick. It was efficient. It was what we wanted to happen. No two of those incidents are ever alike, so it's unprecedented of what they're facing typically, and this was no exception. But the initial reports are very positive. There is a medical liaison from our organization, from IMSA, that was on site immediately and stayed with the drivers throughout their care at Halifax. And there will be a full analysis on that, but initial reports are positive.
So I'm going to start by our scorecard by doing a little bit of the job for you. And it starts with acknowledging that the team has done a successful job in launching a new series. It took the green flag. You had a strong crowd at the race. I think you had a record crowd at Daytona for the Rolex.
That's correct.
Very large field of race cars.
Yep.
And maybe more manufacturers on track than the 12 podium steps for the 4 classes. So that's good on you. Congratulations for getting us to the green flag. Let's talk a little bit about the racing itself. Is it where you want it to be in terms of what occurred on track in terms of the racing at the Rolex for your first Tudor race?
I would give you a two-pronged answer to that. And for our debut and for the coming out, so to speak, of the Tudor United SportsCar Championship, we are very pleased with the caliber and the quality of the racing. If you looked at 3 of the 4 classes had on-track battles for the win on the last lap of the race. And after 24 hours of racing, that is not a common occurrence. I think we're all familiar with some events that, it's multiple laps that separate first and second and more laps between third and fourth and on down the line. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Is there some learning and some adjustment that needs to occur going forward? Indeed. I think there will likely be some adjustments between now and Sebring, but I don't want to bait anyone on that category.
Well, that was one of my questions on balance of performance. Should the fans, the viewers, the teams look at balance of performance as a race-to-race scenario, or is it a collective? For example, Daytona is a very unique venue. You can argue that Sebring is too, but they're both very different. How should we be looking at this balance of performance? You had about a second gap with a DP versus a P2 at Daytona. I would imagine the dynamics of Sebring would change that ratio. How are we looking at balance of performance, as a collective or race to race?
Well, we don't want to be ever in a race to race scenario. That's a slippery slope, and that would not. If we find ourselves in that position, then we've done something wrong. But you're right. Daytona, by its nature, is a very unique, quite possibly the most extreme example of the venues we race with, and it's not unlike Le Mans. And for the teams that are racing in Europe or racing as part of the World Endurance Championship, there is a Le Mans spec, and then there's a different spec that applies to all other venues, knowing that some cars are going to perform in shorter, tighter, more downforce, positive venues than others that are perhaps more wide open. We had a worst case scenario in our situation coming with our first event in a 24-hour race on a venue like Daytona. Really difficult. And I think Scott Elkins and Richard Buck and their team did a remarkable job of not only balancing the P2 and the DP car, and we can debate all day what could have been done better, but also the separation in the classes. I mean, there was a good separation on the track of cars performing such that there was good solid racing within each class, and there was a good separation between them.
We talked to a couple of drivers as part of this show as well, and where everyone kind of maybe predicted that it was going to be a real stress test in the infield and the brake points and the brake zones because of VMAX being so close, but the cars having different capabilities in braking. Everyone conducted themselves, rather well. It was tough racing, and it was tough to make your moves. But to that point, I'm going to ask you a little bit about yellow flags.
Sure.
Over the course of the race, I believe there were maybe about 16 yellow flags. Most of them had a 5 to 7 lap interval. But the one yellow flag that everyone focused on was the one that came rather quickly at the end. And it spurred a lot of thinking and a lot of commentary, and we're going to get into a little bit of that maybe a little later.
Yeah.
Again, your assessment of race management, and in particular that last yellow flag.
I know it's a topic of conversation, and it was characterized to be this morning as being out of character in terms of how IMSA has conducted races in the past, and even how Grand Am has conducted itself in recent times. And I wouldn't argue that. I think there's more analysis that needs to be done. I'm going to be real candid with you, Leo, and tell you that in the days that have transpired since the race, we've had a lot to manage through, and getting to the point of wanting to roll up the sleeves and talk about how that last yellow came out and why did it play out the way it did. I'll be really honest with you and say we just haven't gotten there yet. I'm not ducking the question because I'm sure it'll come up again, but I don't have a good answer for you right now, only because it hasn't been addressed.
So I'm going to ask one final question related to that. And it goes to the classic elephant in the room racing question.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a sport or a show? How do you address that in terms of the thinking that goes into this series and race control and all that?
Well, I think the way I would describe it is it has to be entertainment with credibility, and that is a hallmark of what we stand for, and that hasn't changed, and that won't change. I think Paul Walter and the whole race control crew, keep in mind, those guys have been at the helm there for 24 hours. You don't get to sneak away to the hotel when you're in that role. And I've got nothing but high praise for the race that they called. And I want to assure everybody that is concerned that maybe we're headed in another direction that's going to take us down a path that they're uncomfortable with. The integrity of racing within IMSA, and specifically the Tudor United SportsCar Championship, will not change. And we're part of a bigger organization now. There are more people around the table, so to speak, but I can assure you that we're committed to keeping the integrity of our entertainment product.
Scott, I appreciate that, and I was not going to ambush you, but I was going to wait a little later to the end to talk about the GTD scenario, but this actually is a good moment. My understanding is that there was a committee that was making some of those last-minute decisions. Let's start with, what was the reasoning to assess the penalty first? Because I think I read the rules, and I think I understood that avoidable contact does not actually require contact. It is a race director's call and judgment. So I'm asking first, what was the reasoning behind the penalty in the first place?
Well, I think that question would be better posed to Paul Walter in his role as race director and the staff that he surrounds himself with. I know obviously they felt that there was a justifiable penalty that occurred on the track. I don't want to go in this forum at this time because, frankly, it's still a topic of discussion and investigation here, where we haven't reached final closure. I mean, the decision is made. That's not going to change. They felt in their observation of what happened on the track that there was a move in that corner between those two cars that warranted a penalty. I think upon further review, I hate to use that phrase, but I don't know how else to put it, we're very committed to making the opportunity for that example. And that example, in my personal opinion, I'm speaking for myself now, is an example of two professional drivers in very competitive cars that were racing for the win of the Rolex 24 at Daytona on the last turns of the last lap. And we are of the opinion that we don't want to deprive our fans of the excitement and the entertainment value that was displayed with that sequence of events. And I agree that it's unprecedented what has taken place here. And I don't want to in any way have this reflect poorly on anything that was done in race control. Those guys do a fantastic job, and no one does it better. But in light of the debut event that we had and wanting to send a very a solid signal to everyone, but at the top of the list, our fan base, our championship hopefully will have numerous such examples of that, where after a long 24 hours of incredible competition, it's coming down to the last turns of the last lap. It doesn't get better.
I think you just answered the question, my question of what was the basis for your decision. I appreciate that. It obviously showed a lot of fortitude to make the change decision, and you're right, you only have one shot to make the first impression, and this was the inaugural race. Let's move on and ask you to score the media that covered the event.
Wow, score the media.
Please.
First of all, the fact that we were able to bring our debut event of both the first event of the Tudor United SportsCar Championship as well as the debut of the Tequila Patron North American Endurance Cup, all of these things happening at once, and then the ability to put them live on the Fox network for the first 2 hours was a dream come true. And from a media perspective, the live television that afforded us is 2 thumbs up and all A's. I saw in the week leading up to the race feature articles in USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the Street and Smith Sports Business Journal did a business story. There were countless internet stories and features. Fox did a 1-hour pre-race kind of road to Daytona preview of the new Tudor Championship and what's coming up, I'd be hard pressed to complain about the media in any shape or form here. Could it be better? Absolutely. Wish we had front page coverage in all the major dailies on Monday morning of Sunday's results. Wish that we had, live network pre-race show going out, a la the NFL. But for a debut event in a unified sports car platform, we're very pleased by how people responded.
I hope you trust the context of my next question, and it is intended to allow us to have an open discussion so we can share with the fans. I would say, with a little bit of respect, but my sense that with the Fox broadcast, it started to feel for me for a little bit that a Grand Am race broke out and it had a ALMS PC and GTLM race within it. And then there was MRN. And I guess my question becomes, how do we assure the sports car fans that you've built equity with that we're not going down a path that isn't unifying?
Yeah, I didn't have an opportunity. Unfortunately, my time during the race is largely taken up with many meetings that are scheduled weeks out. And I did get a chance to see some of the race broadcast, but not all of it. I was able to listen to some of the radio MRN broadcast, but not a lot. And I think I know what you're referring to, that there's some, name pronunciation and some of the vernacular that's often used in road racing and in sports car racing in particular might have been disjointed at times. I would compare it to, this was the equivalent of opening night of a major new restaurant. You can prepare and you can do the soft opening, but there's no substitute for that first night. And is there some needs for improvement and some opportunities for us to do better? Absolutely. But I wouldn't judge us on this first example. I would ask for patience and constructive feedback, constructive criticism, if you want to call it that way. We've got thick skin and we're wide open. But let's check back in a few racers from now, and my guess is you'll be pleased with what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
Are you getting feedback from the fans? How are you collecting that?
We're getting a lot of feedback for the fans, but that's nothing unusual. We're fairly accessible here digitally and otherwise. And I would say that profound, majority has been very positive. There's some humorous examples that people are taking, a lot of joy in sharing with us. There's the usual, over the top negative reports that, again, if you look hard enough, you'll find people that will complain about free ice cream. And I hope that our core fan base and the larger fan base is keeping all of what has been accomplished in perspective. We've merged two very large organizations with very dissimilar cultures together into one. And I think anybody that attended the Rolex over the weekend went away feeling good about the future.
There's a little bit of a circle to my next question that could get us back to the media discussion, but obviously you're trying to bring two fan bases together. Obviously, I would assume that the big picture vision is to grow the sport. Where are you targeting to get your fans, more fans, or are we targeting right now to sustain the two groups and keep them in the fold?
D, all of the above.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that with real sincerity. We've done a lot of research on this already. And when we merged these two organizations together, if you would have told me that we had for many years been sharing the same fan base, I would have said I agree with that. I think some people would watch ALMS one weekend and they'd watch Grand Am the next. In fact, looking at our two fan bases, there was only a 12% crossover. Right. So, there was 80+% of our respective fan bases that were unique. And when we dug deeper, did more research with them, the good news was the majority of them were aware of the merger, and the vast majority, over 90%, said, if you guys get this right, I will be just as likely or more likely to watch on television, to buy a ticket and attend. And I hope that we've set a good example with this first race to combine those two fan bases together.
And you know me, so here we go a little bit. Taking that 12% gap and not picking on MRN, but using it as an example. And there was a lot of feedback that I saw. You have a chance of losing 50% of your audience if they feel that they're watching NASCAR trying to broadcast sports car. So I guess my question becomes, where is IMSA in terms of the NASCAR connection to what you're trying to accomplish? Is it an analogy I once used that Lexus didn't want in their launch to let people know that they were a Toyota, they wanted to stand on their own, or is there a connection that we feel is a good thing to grow the sport right now?
Well, I don't want to dwell so heavily on the MRN component as being, the be-all, end-all of how our fan base is going to respond. I think if you look at the total picture of what this new United Sports Car platform reflects, you can truly see best practices in place from each category. And the on-track product, if anything, I would say leans more heavily towards what was the American Le Mans Series product. If you look at the marketing and the communications that we're doing, I would say the same about that. The examples you've raised, albeit probably more high profile because they're focused on mass media, and the MRN example, that clearly is a carryover that could be described as heavily weighted on the NASCAR index. Again, I think going forward, after one race, we just did a debrief today of our entire staff, and this was part of the dialogue. We're very transparent in this, and if we can incorporate some of the familiar names and faces that were part of our previous broadcast into the MRN community, which is hopefully an option. I don't want to announce anything that's not done, but directionally, that's where we're headed. And it goes way beyond just pronouncing the drivers' names correctly.
Yes. Two last questions. There's been a lot of conversation about the yeoman job to get technical specifications out, to get everything organized. And the teams have responded and tried to stay with you through that whole thing. Where, in your sense, is the attitude of the teams, the drivers, the manufacturers coming out of Rolex, heading towards Sebring?
I would still describe it as cautiously optimistic. And again, if you want to find the representatives that are heavily indexed on one side or the other, they're out there. If you want to write a decidedly negative, antagonistic, almost inflammatory story, those guys are there. On the other hand, if you want to write a glowingly positive, everything's great, we're so pleased to be here, those people are in that paddock as well. I think there's quite a bit of relief in the teams knowing that this first big test is behind us, and it's the most extreme example. We've already talked about that. Sebring will be another unique test because that track is also its own entity. But then the next race is the Long Beach Grand Prix through the streets of Long Beach. So that'll be another unique and very extreme example. I think Scott Elkins and his team have demonstrated an ability to get this right. And it's never going to be perfect, ever. This will be an ongoing process. But for a first time out of the gate, having to balance two very radically different platforms, I couldn't be more proud of the job that's been done. I think if you look at the other categories, look at the level of competition within all of the classes. GTLM, incredible. GTD, I think the top 20 cars were within a second. When you look at the variety and the disparity, the unique platforms that are out there, it's truly amazing how matched these cars are. And if we look at this as being the starting point with the expectation that it's going to get better from here, there's a lot to be thinking very positively about.
Well, you're right. You can find different opinions. That's why I walked down the center of the paddock and didn't go, forget it. Last question. When you're alone reflecting on all this, what part of Tudor and IMSA do you think about most?
That's an easy one for me to answer because I've actually talked about this before, and having lived through every aspect of this process, from the initial negotiations to the final closing of the transaction, to the merger process that began September 5th, 2012, to now having the first event behind us. The best elements, the most positive result of this process has been the people. And we just sat in a room downstairs in our headquarters here and had every member of our full-time staff, with the exception of a handful that were on the road today that joined us by phone, but every single member of that staff had an opportunity to speak up and talk about the things that work, the things that we want to change, the things that we want to do differently for Sebring next year at Daytona. And I looked around the room and I thought to myself, and then I leaned over to Ed Bennett and I said, I've never been surrounded by a team like this. And it's a little intimidating because we don't have any more excuses. We've got all the resources, we've got the personnel, we've got everything we need to make this work. And the commitment is there, the passion is there, and I hope that people understand that we've moved a lot of mountains to get this first race behind us the way we did, and we are very proud of the results that we achieved at Daytona over the weekend, and it's only going to go better and more positive from here. And I appreciate your interest in this because, frankly, you help us spread the word that there's some good things going on in sports car racing, and it's right here in the Tudor Championship.
Scott, thank you for your time, and we will see you at Sebring. Thank you again.
Thank you, Leo.
So look at this. We are here with Jordan and Ricky Taylor. First of all, guys, we're not going to talk about your goddamn hair, okay? That's my mom called, and she said the guy looks like a hobo. So
which one, Ricky?
Yeah, right.
He does?
And based on the media fixation with Danica over there, Ricky, who knew you were even his brother? So welcome to the fold, okay? And welcome to ShakeDown. I want to get into the racing at the Rolex, but first of all, I got to start. You guys actually suck. You finished P2 2 years in a row. What's the problem here? How does?
Yeah, I know it's frustrating. I mean, we had 2 perfect years where we didn't go a lap down one time, and we didn't go behind the wall. So we had perfect races, and we just came up a little short 2 years in a row.
So I read some of the PR. Tell us authentically. I mean, how frustrating is that? You get so close, you don't get it done. It's not a failure, you're on the podium, but I mean, where does your head really sit on this?
I mean, it was very disappointing. I mean, we went the whole morning thinking, we're in a really good position to win the race. And when the 5 car got the penalty and they went a lap down, I really thought that they were going to struggle more to come back from that. And they were, I thought, the car that we had to beat. And when they got back to the lead and it came down to that last 30 minutes, that's when, it started to set in that we were going to have a rough time to win the race. And just all that build-up really led to a pretty empty feeling at the end.
And I got to ask one more question before we get into some details. Who the hell was that old man you led in the race car? I thought I was watching Angry Grandpa 2, the movie. What was that all about?
Yeah, well, we figured, Ricky and I are in the car this year for the first time together, and we'll probably never have an opportunity to do this again. So we pushed him pretty hard to get in the car in the offseason. He didn't want to do it because he hasn't driven in 4 years, but I think it was big of him to do it, and, he put in a lot of time in testing and training at home, so we thought we were proud of him in the end.
And for the record, he did about, 50 minutes, 51 minutes? I mean, the lap times didn't make you suffer. I mean, you're not blaming him at the dinner table here, are we?
No, he did a really good job. I mean, he probably only did 25 laps total in a Corvette DP, so he hasn't driven the car in forever, a DP, and the cars are very different this year. So we all thought he did an excellent job getting up to speed and, not going a lap down and everything. He did really well.
That difference of DP car, that's the perfect starting point, because the point of our conversation, I want it to be about what it's like this year racing versus your experiences in previous years. The 2014 DP car is different. How was it different first for you to drive versus last year's equipment and technology?
I think the biggest thing from a driving point of view is, we've got a little bit more power, we've got traction control, paddle shift, and now we've got carbon brakes. So I think the brakes for, I think both of us, we've been driving on steel our whole careers, so getting the feel in the brake pedal and understanding how to use it was probably the biggest thing in testing. And as for handling of the car, it's not much different. You got a little bit more power, a little bit more braking power. So once you kind of figure out how it works, it's just another race car.
Now, I heard some of the teams tell me that they had not had a chance to dial in their traction control. Were you guys able to use it, or are we still on that learning stage, for lack of a better word?
I think the advantages of traction control, are very. It's a big deal. I think a lot of people don't realize how much lap time there is to be gained there, and we did a lot of work at the Roar, and then due to some engine deals, we had to come back with all of our changes, and we started fresh this weekend. So I don't think we've maximized it. We've still got a long way to go, but this is my first real time other than Le Mans using traction control, so it's a big learning curve for me as well.
Will you find two things? One, does traction control help with tire management? And then number two, is it going to be a bigger deal at Sebring for you to have it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Sebring, you've got all the bumps and everything that upset the car, so you can work with yaw as well with traction control. And I think especially with adding more power, traction control is definitely going to help the tire life. Last year we kind of had to save a little bit at the beginning of a stint to make sure you had something at the end. And I think now if you use traction control to your advantage, and you can kind of use too much of it to really save the tires, so you can really tune around that, set up the car for a whole stint.
So I think Daytona is a little bit of a unique animal, but it's our first experience. So what was it like for the DP racing against those P2 cars that were out there? Where did you feel like you had an advantage? Where was it challenging? I mean, maybe in the infield you were kind of more neck and neck. What was going on?
Yeah, I think coming into it, we knew this was going to be our best race of the season in comparison to the P2s, just with how the rules and the cars are. So obviously we were quicker in the straights and they were quicker in the infield, and you can really tell, how the series is going to set up for the rest of the season. Just looking at their bus stop speed and our sector times. But racing with them was nice, on a personal level, getting to know everybody. And then Dad's phone. But just the racing on track was more straightforward because you just clear them in the straight and then let it all sort itself out in the infield.
That's IMSA calling, telling you guys to not talk to me.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta bring this up, and I know our prayers and our thoughts are with Mimo and Matteo. When something like that happens for the people that haven't raced, what truly do you think about, or is it a lock it out of my mind, or it'll never happen to me? I mean, what went through your head when a friend, a buddy like that had that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a shock for everyone when something happens like that. You're usually used to seeing it on TV. My first experience with that was last year at Le Mans with the Simonson accident and experiencing that. So, when it happened this weekend, I was in my motorhome watching, and I was right across the road from the 99 motorhome. So as soon as I heard about it, I ran across there to see Alex and John, and, they didn't know anything. They didn't have any radio contact or anything. So I think when you're in the track, it's the worst feeling because you don't hear anything, and you go to everyone in the paddock and you're asking, is he talking to anybody? Is he conscious? And no one has an answer. And we didn't hear for like 6 or 7 hours. So you're getting into the car and it's still on your mind. Once you're in the car, you're okay. But anytime you have like a clear mind, even under caution, every time I drove past that area, I would think about it. And I think once you're in green mode on the racetrack, you don't think about it, but whenever you're out of the car, it's always on your mind.
Now, there'll be a lot of comments from people who aren't inside this, talking about DP construction versus carbon tub. I need your sense and an understanding of, did that car do its job and work to keep Mimo alive? Or is there a reality that we should be rushing for that carbon tub before 2017? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think there's definitely. I'm not a safety expert, but I think there's definitely room for improvement in safety. But I think one of the things that was very good for the accident was one of the roll hoops that goes through the middle of the cockpit, and that actually stopped the car from coming into the inside of the car. So, I mean, that's one area that we can say it was a positive on the DP side, but I think there's always room for improvement, and I think everybody wants everybody to be safe. So.
And these cars are going damn fast now. I mean, like you said, they've added the tools, they've added horsepower. They've always been quick. They're quicker, so it's serious stuff, right?
Yeah, that was, like worst case scenario. You see that in a video game or something where there's a car stopped on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And it basically, just like in a movie where it rode up the nose into the car. So it was a worst case scenario. And, now we have the narrower greenhouse. So I think narrowing that, bringing all the roll cages areas closer together kind of helped the car from entering more into the car. So, little details like that, I'm sure everyone's looking at. And, we're not the guys to talk to on how to improve a car's safety, though.
Yeah, and IMSA is going to do their study, so we'll be staying tuned. So, prayers and I, we know Mimo from a while back as well. So, all good on that. And I hope the recovery happens the best it can and as fast as it can. Let's talk about your reaction. Did it feel different racing this Daytona as the Tudor United SportsCar Championship versus the Grand Am's races that you did there? Was there any difference?
It's funny because actually when we came home, Warren Schechter works on the commercial side of our team. He goes to us and he goes, "Do you think we're part of something big now?" Because it felt like when you're on the grid, there's so many people and the stands had people in them, and it felt like we were part of a big deal, which was really cool. And he asked us if we think it's starting to take off a little bit maybe, and I've never been a part of something that's taken off before, but it definitely gives you a nice feeling when we're on the grid and there's a good buzz. Everybody in the series is positive. I think the big bucks have been spent already, so if there's anybody dropping out, they've already dropped out. So hopefully we can keep that momentum going.
Was traffic different? I mean, you had different cars than you had before, PC, GTLM. Was that any different for you?
Yeah, I think it was a unique year. We had a lot of guys who probably didn't know what they were doing out there as well.
I was going to ask about drivers eventually. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot, like the competition at the front was more than it's ever been, I think, in every class. GTD, the top 7 cars in qualifying were within a 10th. It was unbelievable, and GTLM's always right there, PC as well. So, I think from a competition standpoint, it was good, and from a driver standpoint, getting through traffic was probably harder than ever because of the difference in speed, and everyone's looking for that last 10th and not really wanting to open up the gap. But I think for the race itself, it was more for survival, just staying out of trouble.
So as an outsider looking in, I'm going to throw the compliments because everyone was predicting with the balance of performance and the VMAX of the cars that the infield was going to be a real cluster F and that everyone's going to be dive bombing to get the advantage to get onto the banking and cut their way through traffic. But it looked pretty adult, it looked pretty intelligent, it looked like you guys collectively and your team individually had managed that pretty well. Was that more of an unfounded fear, or was it just, here's the deal, head down, we got to do this, and you all did a better job than we expected? What was really going on there?
Our team, they really drill it into us that we can't hit anybody, and I think that's become the case with a lot of the teams that have done the Rolex 24 in past years, just because you see how hard of a race it is for the last 4 hours, and so you want to have the car in as good of condition as you can. So I think for the DP teams, it was kind of an experience thing, and it was really a balance because the GTD cars you could pass easily on the infield, but the PC and the GTLM cars, you could sit behind them for the entire infield and lose 2-3 seconds stuck behind the same car. So that was frustrating, and oftentimes it was tempting to make a move, but you didn't want to be the one guy to put a scratch on the car.
Let's finish up by talking about Sebring. I'm assuming you've tested there already one way or the other, yes?
Not in this car.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
So you'll be there the first time that week leading up to the race? and computer simulation for a setup, or I mean, how raw are we going in?
Yeah, I mean, Action Express and I think Wayland tested there in the off season, so hopefully their data will go to Pratt and Miller, who's kind of the Corvette in between engineering group. So hopefully we can get some simulation data from them and get an idea on aero and gearing and all that kind of stuff. So Pratt and Miller's been there with Corvettes for forever, so we can get simulations from that as well.
What's the bumpiest track that Grand Am used to race that's similar to Sebring?
Oh, the bumpiest is probably Belle Isle.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can really compare in terms of downforce, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of the races this year we're going to be starting fresh with all the changes. But
So that's the one little quick nuance, just to clarify. There's a bunch of equipment that was added to the DP. One was going to be a rear diffuser to make downforce for the Daytona prototype to kind of bring it up to speed against, I guess, the P2. But you didn't run the diffuser at Daytona for various reasons. You get that back for Sebring, right? So now will be more of a downforce configuration?
Yeah, that's the plan.
How do you see that race shaken out? Is this going to be now your turn to run strategy against P2s, or you think the cars will be more head up?
I mean, I was quite surprised how quick, the LMP2s were kind of mid-range on the straights, so we kind of only really overtook them kind of mid to the end of the straight, so I think Sebring should be closer in that respect. But, it's funny running around them in like the bus stop or something, and you get caught up, you think, all right, well, I'm just going to follow him through the bus stop, and then you realize, well, he's got a lot more downforce than I do, and you almost go off the track.
And I guess
but
there's,
I think,
like a 300-pound difference?
yeah, it's
in
quite a lot.
weight?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's probably more than that.
I think it might be more, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So that'll make a difference on wear and tear on brakes, the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
tires and everything, yeah.
I think Sebring, it'll definitely be a closer match and probably shifted more towards the LMPs. Probably suit them a little bit better.
The change that IMSA made between the Roar and the 24-hour was a bigger change than I expected in terms of straightaway speed. So they got a lot closer in that respect.
Well, I'm going to spare you the discussion of whether there are going to be more changes. We'll get to some other people who deal with that stuff.
Yeah.
Good luck, but let me finish with a question. So now we've launched Tudor United SportsCar Championship. Who do you think the fan of this series is or is going to be?
What do you mean, the fan?
So do you think we're going to find both Grand Am and ALMS fans coming together? Are we going to find new fans? Who do you think they're targeting?
I hope so. I mean, hopefully it's just one United sports car fan at the end. I mean, I think it's going in one direction, and hopefully everyone will be behind it because it is one group now. I mean, ALMS was always the technology-driven LMP1 cars and the GTLM cars with all the factory support. And I think now we kind of get the best of both worlds. I don't think we'll get the LMP1 kind of technology in the prototypes just from a budget standpoint, but I think in a couple of years we'll see it kind of evolve back to where we want it to be. And for me, and I'm sure Ricky and a lot of other people agree, I mean, I think our favorite era of sports car racing was the late 80s, early 90s when everyone just brings the best that they could build, and everyone goes for what they can get.
Yeah, we had a chat with Alex, and I knew Dan from my Toyota days. Those were mega cars. They were mega cars.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you at Sebring. Appreciate the time. No, I'm not going to mention here, so just go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks.